All right. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Studio Q Live show. My name is Quinn Jacobson, and we're getting on time, rolling through this. I think we're going to do well today. I don't think we'll have any technical difficulties, but we'll see. I've got my chat window popped out. Excuse me. I got my chat window popped out here. I'm looking at my live feed so I can keep track of everything. And we'll just, it's 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time right now in the Denver metro area here. And my name is Quinn Jacobson, and this is the Studio Q Show Live. And there's Samuel. Hey, Samuel, good to see you. We'll get some people in here, and we're going to talk about a wide range of wet collodion issues today. Questions, different topics. Good morning, Pat. Good afternoon. Good to see you guys. We're going to cover a lot of material, I think. We'll see how far we get. And we'll, if you get confused about anything, I've put a couple of links in the chat. And you can always look at the video description. I've included the topics we're going to talk about and go over that. Good afternoon, Mario. Good to see you. Hello, Sean. Welcome, welcome. I don't know why I have a frog in my throat. No, I don't have the coronavirus, if that's what you're thinking. So I'm okay. There's Odad and Renzo. Hello, hello. Welcome. Good to see everybody in here. This is going to be a good one. I think you'll get a lot of information out of this. If you have any questions, I'm going to keep my eye close on the chat, and we'll address those as they come up. I'm going to first start with the first order of business and tell you, if you don't have my book yet, grab it. I'm in the high 30s, low 40s now left of these things. I want to get them out of here and close this edition. These are limited edition copies. I want to get them closed out by June. That's when I leave for the mountain. And I shut pretty much everything down for the next while. So while these are going to be regular through the next couple of months on Saturday mornings or Saturday afternoons or evenings or whenever you're watching this, they will come to an abrupt halt when I go to the mountain to build my new dwelling, if you will, up there. So I'm trying to get a lot of information in. I promote my book because that's how I can do this stuff, and you guys have supported me greatly, and I appreciate that. And if we can keep that going, I just got some figures and some outlay on my on-site waste management system and my dwelling costs, my building materials, and it's frightening, but you guys are helping out on that, and eventually, who knows, maybe some of you will come up to the mountain and hang out and work in the Daylight Studio, the Northlit Studio that I'm building up there, part of my structure. Do some photography, do some bladesmithing or blacksmithing. If anybody interested in that, you can do that as well. So that's my book. The description is in the link is in the description, the video description below. You can click on that, go to my website, studioq.com. They're signed, they're editioned, and you get 40 some odd high def videos to learn how to do the process. And that's what we're going to talk about today. First, I wanted to address a couple of issues a couple of interesting, I wouldn't say new things, but new to me maybe. And I want to talk to you about some glass that I'm going to try. And let me look at this chat here. Oh, the virus is literally here around my city. That's not good, Sam. That's not a good thing. I hope. Stay safe. Get one of those masks and stay away from people and wash your hands a lot. Good morning, Sanford. Hey, Don. Hello from deep in the heart of Texas. Welcome. Glad to have you. Interested in gold toner. I've looked into it, and there are Yes, that's okay, Sanford. Let's talk about that. I'll remember that. I'll go back through the chat as I'm going through here. I have my show notes in here that we're going to address, but like I said, we'll throw these in. That's a great topic, actually. As you know, last Saturday I didn't do a show. I did one on Sunday for the chemical safety and handling stuff. and Saturday I was doing a workshop with Mr. John Graybill, a wonderful guy, a friend. Edward Curtis's great-grandson. He did the vanishing race work of the Native Americans here in the western U.S. And he came over and spent the day last Saturday. That's what I was doing. We were doing pop prints here. Did some beautiful prints. He's got the Descendants projects that you guys should check out. The Courtesy Legacy Foundation.org. Google that. Give your time and attention and money to it. Geez, excuse me. It's well worth it. And he's doing a wonderful project on photographing the descendants of the people that his great-grandfather Edward Curtis photographed, the Native Americans. And John is doing it on dry plate. And this is where the glass came into play. I'll tell you the story there when we get there. And we did some beautiful pop prints. And we went over gold toning. So Sanford brought up a great point there. We'll talk about gold toning, the borax and the thiocyanate and the different. Some of them aren't available anymore, and I'm going to tell you what I recommend here. Hello, Phil. Welcome, Phil. Fantastic. Made it. First time watching. Great. I'm glad you're here. That's wonderful. Big Boy 69 Sanderac varnish. I've been getting pitting in my plates. Okay. This is self-mixed varnish from a well-known recipe. I didn't get any pitting at all when I used B&S varnish. It only started when I mixed. Okay, Big Boy 69, we'll address that too. When you talk about pitting, does it look like an orange peel? Does it look like, first of all, where do you live? Is there a lot of humidity? And does the surface look like kind of like an orange peel? That could be too much water. Or what kind of alcohol did you use to mix it? Too much water, or the humidity in the air? There's a lot of things. We'll jump into that and talk about that. So gold toning and varnish issues, we can address those. Let's talk about this glass. So I primarily make negatives now. I make positives too, but my game is negatives. I love making negatives. I love making prints. That's what I love to do. So one of the things that I've always had an issue with is going to a big box store here in the U.S., a Home Depot or a Lowe's or something like that, and buying window pane glass and cutting it up and using it. It seems to work fine, right? But it's 2.5 millimeters thick, 2.3 millimeters thick, something like that. And also, the biggest concern I have with it is the transmission of UV light, of how much light that it actually allows through. Since it's window pane glass, I'm concerned about how much actual UV I'm getting through that. So one thing I wonder about my print times, and then I wonder also about the quality of the light. Am I getting everything on the print that's actually there, et cetera, et cetera. So last week when John was here and we were doing a pop workshop, he makes plates, dry plates, and he gets them from this Jason Lane in New Hampshire. And I contacted Jason Lane, and he told me he had some blanks. It's not what he does, so if you want dry plates, get dry plates from him. But more importantly, he gave me some information about the soda lime glass out of Howard Glass Company, and I'll put the link in the description. But as I started looking at this, I started looking at the quality of glass. And in my daylight studio in the mountains, I'm going to probably end up using plastic. There's a version of plastic I can use with a high transmission of UV. That's what we want, both making photographs and printing photographs. So check this out. I just have a half plate here, but I want to show you the difference. Number one, in the size, the thickness of the plates, right? And also, he also includes a little notch here, if you can see that little notch, kind of like film, so you can tell which side is the emulsion side. So 1.3 millimeters thick. There's no glare on it like some of the glass, the window glass that I've used for negatives. They tend to have a glare. There's not really a whole lot of glare, color glare, I mean. And I'm really excited to try this. I just got it, and I've got. That's from a broken piece, actually. What I actually did is I actually ordered 20 sheets of whole plate. So this is the whole plate stuff here. Notch up here, I'll probably use the right side so the emulsion side is up. The notches there, as you can see, or maybe you can see it, I don't know what I'm doing here. A little notch there. So the whole plate size, beautiful. I got 20 sheets of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run some tests, and I haven't had a chance, like I said, I just got this. I'm going to run a test on the window pane glass and the new J lane glass, the lane glass here. And then I'm going to order some soda lime glass. That transmission in the 350, 400 nanometer area is over 90% UV transmission, which is very exciting, kind of nerdy, right? But very exciting. And I'll order some of that. And I'm going to do tests with all three of them. The soda lime, you can go very, like 0.4 millimeter, less than a half a millimeter thick. I'm not going to go that thin. I'm going to do 1 millimeter, 1.2, 1.3 millimeter thick glass. I'm going to keep them pretty much the same on that area, and then use a window pane, use lanes glass, and then use some soda lime glass, and do this exact same image and do the exact same prints and see printing times, quality, detail, all that. So that is some interesting stuff to me. I'm kind of nerdy that way, but so he says, like the surface of the moon. Okay. Well, and is the pitting consistent? That's another thing about, I'm in Canada, cold and dry. Okay. One thing I can tell you. Okay, so that's the glass, and we'll move on from there. Let's address Bigga Boy 69's question here about varnishing. Varnishing is one of those things that you can have a real problem with in environment and in how you extract or how you make your varnish. Okay, the environment problems, I'll go over these. I don't know exactly what your problem exactly is, but maybe you'll find something in this information I'm about to give that makes sense. The environment with varnishing, the lower the humidity, the drier it is, the better it is. Because what happens with varnish is gum sandarac and water in any form does not get along. Gum sandarac hates water. So even that little bit of 5% water in the alcohol that you use can cause issues. But if you don't have enough, it can allow your collodion and your collodion to melt, your nitrocellulose to melt away. So you have to have a little water in it. But more specifically, your environmental conditions. Clean, dry, and average 68 Fahrenheit, 20 degrees Celsius is kind of the perfect dust-free, calm, no windows open, no fans blowing, and low humidity. Then you warm your varnish up, you warm your heat up, your plate up, you warm your varnish, take the chill off your varnish. If it's cool, you varnish your plate, drain it. You can see the methodology that I use and the results that I get by the methodology that I use. But I keep my environment very clean. I'll even spritz the air sometimes right before I varnish. I know that adds a little humidity in the air, but I live in a very dry area as well here in Colorado. So the second thing is how you make the varnish. It's not difficult to weigh out the gum sandarac and add the alcohol, dissolve it out. Here's some varnish that I've just recently made. And if you see that, all that sediment on the bottom, this has been sitting on my desk for about a week, maybe 2 weeks. I don't pour that varnish into a bottle. In fact, I'm very gentle setting it down. And you can see it's labeled as well too, right? How do I extract that varnish for use? I use a big pipette. I'll show it to you. And I don't want to break it, so I have to stand up to get it out here. So I use a big pipette. This is a 25 mil pipette. It's got a little bit of varnish hanging off of the dried. It hangs in a rack. So I stick the pipette down in the bottom and I decant off the top. I fill the pipette up and move it over. Super, super clean varnish. Now you can filter all you want. Okay, I filter a couple of times even before I put that in the bottle. But the real catch here is using a pipette or a decanter. You can get the decanter, the cork, and the glass tubes, blow it, it'll push it out, blah, 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 however you want to do it. I prefer this method. It's worked well for me. My plates are super clean. There are no pits, there are no marks. My environment's nice and dry. I keep everything solid like that. So take that into consideration. What I'd say, what's your name again? Big Boy 69. I would say that you use a pipette. Let your varnish settle for a week, 10 days, whatever it takes. Decant only the good stuff. Put it in another bottle, let it sit. If you still see sediment, fine dust coming down, let it sit. It'll harden up over a few days. Decant that out of the bottle. Do it until you have no sediment. Then you can pour your plates. I use test tubes. This is the route I go. But then you can pour your plates without having any issues. I would imagine if it's not humidity and it's not the wrong alcohol or high water content or low water content alcohol, and your varnish, your gum sandarac is good, it is the way you're producing or post-producing your varnish that's creating the problems on your plate. I hope that helps. Phil, yes, they probably do have that glass in the UK. You just have to do a little poking around. Do a Google search for soda lime or borosiliate silicate, something like that. Soda lime glass is good. Yeah, 10 fish tanks. Farad, hey Farad, good to see you. So varnishing issues, it's a constant problem. Here's the thing with varnishing. You go through all the labor making this photograph, and you come to the end of it, you've got a beautiful image, you come to the end of it and you pour varnish on it. It either melts away or it pits or it doesn't look good, and you basically ruined the photograph. And if you're printing and you have that kind of stuff happen, you're going to see exaggerated effects on a print from that kind of problem, or any kind of problem with varnish. So it's really important that you learn how these compounds interact and work together, so you can problem solve, and you know the methodology of mixing and making this stuff, so you can kind of mitigate a lot of those problems. Okay, about gum sandarac and water. I tested making a batch of sandarac varnish using denatured alcohol, and it strips every image. Had I used Everclear, I don't think that collodion would melt. Well, Don, that's a good point. One of the problems, and we've gone over this about denatured gum, there you go. We've gone over some of the questions or comments about denatured alcohol. And denatured alcohol, usually the only difference, and again, you have to read what products you're using with this stuff, right? So you go get a bottle or a can of denatured alcohol, you need to see what the actual alcohol content is. If it's over 95, you need that 5% water in there to mellow it out, right? Because that alcohol is an aggressive solvent. So if you don't have enough water in that alcohol and you pour it on a plate, you're going to dissolve your nitrocellulose. You're going to melt your image away. Now the denatured alcohol, the denaturant really wouldn't play a part necessarily unless it was something, and there are a lot of denaturants that's used in alcohol. So I can't even start to address, does methyl ethyl ketone differ from isopropyl alcohol to acetone? I can't even address all the denaturants that's used in alcohol. And the denaturants put in the alcohol just to prevent people from drinking it. That's all it is. So it's not really the denaturant, Don. It would be more the alcohol content in your varnish. Now, the quick way to resolve that, if you pour varnish on an image and it melts the image, it means your alcohol is super aggressive, and you need to tone that down with some distilled water. And I say in a 500 ml bottle of varnish, start with 10 drops of distilled water, and pour another plate with with plate made with a similar collodion. Another thing that happens sometimes is people will use old, highly iodized red collodion to make images, and the structure of the nitrocellulose is already weakened because it's highly iodized, basically, and oxidized, and you pour the even perfect varnish on it, it can melt the image away too. So there are many variables, and I can't be everywhere for everybody at all times, obviously. So I can only give these high-level views of how the compounds react with other compounds in certain environments, and that's what I try to do. I'm new to wet plate. How long will all my chemicals last? Do you empty your silver tank back in the bottle every day and shooting plates? That's a great question. And one of the items on my list is chemistry shelf life. And let's jump into that. Tried it makes white wispy. Yeah, exactly. Don, when you add the distilled water, I told you gum sandarac and water do not get along. That's exactly what it does. You've got to shake it up and dissolve it and then let it sit again. You've got to dissolve, you got to allow that to go into solution, go into the varnish. Check the alcohol content on your denatured alcohol too. Yeah, try that, Don, and keep us abreast on that. But it's water content is why it's dissolving your image, not the denaturant necessarily. I can't say that definitively. That's my guess. So back to the shelf life of chemistry. One of the questions that I had about over the week here was, what do you have? Basically, I'll paraphrase. I think it was Jack that asked me this. He asked, how do you judge? How many 4x5s or 8x10s or whatever the plate size was do you run through your silver bath before you start checking for maintenance and that kind of stuff? Let me give you my workflow methodology on this. And keep in mind, there's only a couple of products in here that we need to pay attention to that way, okay? There's only, when you think about it, if you're doing glass, you use your plate cleaner for your glass cleaner, right? So that's that goes away, it wipes off, done. So there's no maintenance, there's no evaluation on that. You pour your collodion on your plates, right? Drain it into a drain bottle. You reconstitute that. You can read about that in the book, how I do it. The ether evaporates. You need to reconstitute that so you're not pouring gum out. It's cleaner, blah, blah. You can read all about that. So there's nothing there to maintain other than if you use a drain bottle and you reconstitute, that's what I recommend. There's reconstitution, and that's simple. Then you get to your silver bath. Now you're to the first compound or chemical that you need to pay attention to for maintenance and exhaustion, okay? Exhaustion is probably a better word, because let's talk about what happens in the silver bath after you use it a while. First off, you're pouring this nitrocellulose that's dissolved in alcohol and ether with a salt or 2 or 3 salts in it, and you're putting it in your bath. Okay, first off, your bath is going to fill up with those solvents. The first problem I see that people have is solvent striations, muddy, flat, really poorly, technically poor images, chemically, not necessarily from the person, exposure and that kind of thing. It's the solvents filling your bath up. So if you take your bath and you smell, I think I have a bath, no, that's collodion, sorry. I thought I had a nitrocellulose bath or a silver nitrate bath out here. If you take and open your bath bottle up and smell it, and you can smell alcohol or ether, that means you need to aerate that bath. So I don't care if you've run 10 plates or 20 plates or whatever it is, if those solvents are leaching out, and how does this vary? Well, everybody's a little different. You pour a plate, and if you're not letting it skin over and checking it, and you dump that plate a little too soon in the silver bath, you're going to have a lot more solvent going into your bath than a person that waits for that collodion to skin over and check it and then put it in. You're still going to get solvents in your bath, even if you do it exactly correctly. But over time, those solvents build up. And those are the first thing that build up in a bath are your solvents. So you need to smell your bath, check that, and once you smell those solvents, you need to aerate it. You don't necessarily need to sun it. You just need to aerate it. Put it in a big glass cookie. I got a big glass cookie jar down here, a big round top on it, 30 centimeters, 12 inches, and just let it aerate and let it breathe. If you can't put it somewhere, put a little fan over it and pull those solvents out and let it evaporate and aerate until you don't smell the solvent so strong anymore. It doesn't have to be completely clean. You're always going to have a little bit of an odor to it, but that's the first thing. The second thing on a silver bath, number 2, is when you put that plate in the silver bath with the iodides and bromides on it, you have this chemical process called double replacement, easy for me to say. Double replacement, or metathesis, meaning that they're exchanging these ions and turning the iodide and bromide from potassium, ammonium, or whatever you're using to silver iodide and silver bromide, light-sensitive halogens, right? You're creating film. Well, the byproduct of that is nitrates, because you have AgNO3, and then you're using the iodide and bromides. So now you have these byproducts going into your bath. Those compounds are not easy to get out, even if you're sunning and all that. I mean, you can get a lot of them out, and you can definitely get it to where, maintain it to where it works. How do you know that that's a problem? Well, there's a couple of things. When your bath is over iodized, and why I say over iodized is because you need your bath iodized in order for that process to take place correctly in the first place, because you need to excite your bath, read about it in the book. You need to excite your bath first. So there's a level of iodides you need to fill the silver up with so it doesn't take the iodides from your plate. And then after you put so many plates in there, and it depends on how highly iodized your collodion is, right? What kind of salt you're using, how much you're using, all those kinds of things. Then your plate, your bath is over iodized, and your plate starts to precipitate out these little pieces of iodide and creating pinholes. Literally, they'll just be clear. On a black plate, there'd be black dots. On a glass plate, there'd be clear dots all the way through. They're called pinholes. That's when you actually have to do the heavy maintenance. That's when you actually have to neutralize or pull the iodides out of your bath, but with water. The third usually is what I say. You can add a pinch of some kind of base, alkaline base, soda, alkaline, anything, pH 12, pH 13. So that's when that happens. So and then there's other problems throughout the process. So the silver bath is aerating and then maintaining, right? So you've got a solvent issue and you've got a salts issue. Those are the two things. And the salts issue and the solvents issue can both create a pH problem. And we talked about pH before. A pH problem can cause you all kinds of issues. So either being too basic or too alkaline in your bath is a problem for making positive plates. And you can read about that. We don't need to go into science on that right now. But pH, aeration, solvents, salts, and pH. And the first two affect the third. And then you have ultimately the silver nitrate level. How much silver nitrate do you have in your bath? That's why you need a hydrometer. That's why you need to mark the first time you make your bath with the 90 grams or 88 grams, whatever style of bath you're doing, or whatever kind of collodion you're using. Remember that little marriage we talked about? You need to mark that so you can keep the correct amount of silver nitrate in your bath. Typically, you're going to be a 9%-ish, somewhere in there. There's also what they call a 30 grain and a 40 grain. The 30 grain is about a 7.5–8% bath, just depending on what you're doing. There you go. Okay, let's look at the chat. I hope that makes sense. Let's take a look at the chat. Absolutely, Phil. You're very welcome. If it was me answering your question, I don't know. There is one chemical we should not store in glass, only plastic bottles. Which one was this again? Yes, the one that yes, Pat is absolutely right. KCN, absolutely. Why is that? Because KCN, look, it's terrible if you drop a glass bottle of silver nitrate and break it, right? It'll make a big mess. I get it. And it's fairly caustic and you know, all that kind of stuff. But dropping a glass bottle of potassium cyanide and having the chance of it running into something with an acid or something in it and creating hydrogen cyanide gas, or just how absolutely toxic it is, that's bad news. Always plastic for KCN. And Tim Fry says he uses a magnetic stir in my cookie jar to help aerate. Beautiful. That's awesome. A magnetic stir, a fan over it. Just get those solvents out of there. Just get those solvents out of there. That's the important part. So you've got your collodion, no maintenance other than your drain bottle and reconstitution. You got your silver with your solvents, your salts, and your pH, and then your level of silver nitrate, the actual content of silver nitrate in your bath. Your bath is the most crucial, honestly, and you need to know how to marry your bath up with your collodion. I've often wanted to do this over the years. I've been doing these YouTube videos for many years, but I've often wanted to sit down and do a very deep dive, a very thorough deep dive on how this process works. There's so few people that actually understand how each of these compounds interact with one another and how the image forms, and even how light and that energy reacts with the chemistry, how to maintain things, how to work with things. And I'd love to sit down and do an in-depth, a deep dive on the chemistry. It'd probably bore most people to death, but it would at least give you the tools to understand, hey, I recognize that problem. I know what to do with it because this is off and that's there, and this, I use this compound and I didn't read this, and whatever it is. And maybe sometime in the future, I'll just do a whole series going through each compound and how each compound affects the next and how they interact and what are the problems that you run into. People send me images about every week and say, what went wrong? And it's like, I'm not there. I don't know. We can start by, ticking off the boxes of these general things, these high level things. But in the end, unless you understand the chemistry, basic organic, inorganic chemistry, it's very difficult to troubleshoot problems in the process from afar. If you're next to me, if we're working in a workshop, not a problem. I can basically tell you what's happening because we've either made the chemistry together or we're working together, whatever it is. So let's go on to the next one. There's a silver bath. Now the next compound you have, the developer, that's all goes away, right? There's no maintenance. There's no, other than mixing it properly and understanding your levels of restrainer and levels of for flow, your alcohol and viscosity and your reducer, your iron, right? Levels of that, those kinds of things. So the next one is your fix. And this is where it comes into play. This is where I posted the image on understanding what actually happens when you fix a plate. Let's talk about that just a little bit. Let's see, Farrad has a question here maybe. Oh, thank you, Linda. Welcome, Linda. I didn't see you in there. Yeah, great. I think I'll maybe do that. I don't know if it'll be in this series, but maybe we can start. If people are interested, I don't mind sitting down and pulling out the pen and going through this stuff because I think there's a lot of great information. I'm not a chemist, but I've had to become one over the years to understand what I'm doing. There's not a lot of resources on this, even today, on that level. So you can understand that. So thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. Farrad says, what I don't get is what's happening during the light hitting the plate. How does the fixing bath know what silver is exposed? Very good question. And this goes right into that. So let's talk about what happens when those photons, that light energy strikes a plate. Believe it or not, we have to step back just for a second. Believe it or not, that silver, that emulsion, that film, the silver iodides primarily and the silver bromides that you've converted over in your silver bath start to be reduced, right? They're silver iodide, ammonium. Let's just say this: they're ammonium iodide and cadmium bromide. And if you use different salts, don't worry about it. It's the same process. That ammonium iodide and cadmium bromide go through that double replacement process. So now they're changed over, and those byproducts go into your bath. They're changed over to silver iodide and silver bromide. When the light energy hits that plate in your camera, the process starts to happen of reducing the silver iodide and the silver bromide to metallic silver. That starts to happen just with the light, okay? So they're identified by the photons hitting your highlights, get hit, start that reduction. Your shadow areas don't get hit. So what are they left as? They're left as silver iodide and silver bromide, not the conversion into metallic silver. So now you pull your plate out, you develop your plate, you reduce completely those highlight areas and those midtone areas to the metallic state of silver. But what's left all over that plate that's not reduced is unexposed silver. So when you put that plate in a fix, I don't care if you're using sodium or ammonium thiosulfate or potassium cyanide, what happens when you put that plate into the fix, that unexposed silver is dissolved by the fixer. So in the case, what I use for plates, I use potassium cyanide, KCN, potassium cyanide. When I put that plate in, that potassium cyanide dissolves all the unexposed silver, and that silver is leached into, that unexposed silver is put into the fix, the KCN, and over time, that KCN converts over to AgCn, or silver cyanide. So once those potassium is filled up, replaced with, or filled up, however you want to put it, with silver, the process of removing the unexposed silver slows way down because there's no more room for the silver. The house is full, the bus is full, there's no more room. So your fixing or your clearing of the plate slows way down. And in my book, I talk about 15 seconds to clear, 15 more seconds, a total of 30 seconds. That's when I know enough of my potassium cyanide's converted to silver cyanide that I put that back to the side. I pour it in a jug and I reduce it later to a non-hazardous material. You can read about that as well. I'm not going to go into that right now. And I put fresh fix in. So how do we know, or how does the process know what's removable and what's not? What's been exposed and reduced to metallic silver and what's not? So your black areas, your clear areas are going to wash all the way. It's going to be clear glass, or it's going to be metal, or whatever substrate you're using, right? Now on sodium or thiosulfate, the process is the same. The problem with sodium thiosulfate and ammonium thiosulfate, that's what's called argento thiosulfate. Sodium argento thiosulfate kind of hangs around. Those dissolved products kind of hang around, kind of on the plate a little bit. It requires a little bit longer washing to pull that stuff out, but not like paper. Paper really absorbs this stuff, and that washing time gets extreme with paper because it absorbs into it. So cyanide is for fix use, right? Yes. Phil's asking, cyanide is for fix. Yes. Potassium cyanide or sodium cyanide is for fix. Why would I use that versus hypo? Okay. Just like I said there, Phil, one of the beauties or benefits of potassium cyanide over sodium or ammonium thiosulfate is, for me, is the speed it clears or removes that unexposed silver. It's very effective, very efficient. The life that I get out of the bath, the color I get out of the positive images, and the spectral or the range of sensitivity I get out of making negatives, and more importantly, very, very short wash times. It doesn't get in, that silver cyanide tends to stay away. It doesn't get in or on the plate as much as the byproduct of the sodium thiosulfate or ammonium thiosulfate. Me personally, I don't think you get the snap and the brilliance with the thiosulfate fixes as you do with the cyanide fixes. That's just my personal opinion. That's up for personal interpretation. So that's why I use that fix over the thiosulfate. But who knows, maybe in the future I won't have that advantage. They may take that away from us. The way things are going, it's getting pretty bizarre with how the overlords are coming in saying what we can and can't do. So the silver actually gets kind of hard, dense. Farad, the silver actually starts to reduce to metallic silver. Yes, it's indicated, like your highlights would be reduced quite a bit. And when I talk about reduced, starting to shift from a silver iodide, silver bromide to a metallic state of silver. Then you pour your iron developer on it, pulls it all the way down. Now you're reduced. Now your highlights are silver, metallic silver, and your shadow areas are clear. Then when you put it in the fix, all the unexposed, the whole plate's covered with silver, right? So the whole plate's covered with silver. You need to remove that. That's why it clears out, goes from that kind of blue negative to the positive. That's what you're doing. You're removing all that unexposed silver from the plate. And when you get that veiling or fogging that you can wipe off with a cotton ball, that means you don't have enough restrainer, so you're actually developing that with the developer, and that's why you get that veil or cover over it. Paul, good morning, brother. Question about developers. Some advocate adding some used developer to adding new developer to enhance the activity. I've tried this a few times and saw no difference. Comment? Not a big fan of that. Not a big fan of that. And here's why. What I am a fan of, I will say, is when you pour your developer out on your plate, I try to use as little as you can and try to catch as much as you can, because you've got silver now in that developer cup you can pour back on and use that. But as far as pouring off and using used developer again, you can do it. I think it's kind of a dirty thing, not in a bad thing, not in a dirty, I mean as in chemically speaking, you could have some issues, and I've seen people have issues with this before, because now you've got silver nitrate in the developer, and once you expose that to any amount of UV light, you're going to muddy up. And developer's so inexpensive, and other than the alcohol, of course, and you don't need to use that much, and you don't use any if you can get away with it. But developer's cheap, and you want to clean, especially making negatives. You want it clean. So I'm not a big fan of that. You can do it, just not a fan of it myself. I appreciate you guys jumping in and helping me in with some of these questions. In a nutshell, KCN fixed faster wash time. Yep, there you go. Absolutely, Pat. I totally agree with you. Quinn, you mentioned the conversation of silver brine and silver chloride to metallic, or silver iodide, to metallic silver when exposed to light. What's the developer part in this process? Okay, Pat. What I'm talking about is the plate in the camera is when the light strikes the plate, that silver iodide and silver bromide that you converted in the silver bath from those base salts starts the conversion to the metallic state of silver, to silver. When you pour the developer on it, that iron, the reducer in the reducer in your developer completes that process. So you define it completely. I'm just saying, Farrad asked how that process works with light. Light does start to reduce that, but the iron developer reduces it completely to the metallic state. Your fixer removes the unexposed silver, and then you end up with a photograph, basically. That's kind of how it works. Yes, the developer not only accelerates, it actually completes the reduction in a major way. I don't know the percentages. Let's say 10%, the light starts that process, reducing those halides to metal, and then developer does the other 90%, or 5%, 95%. The majority is done with the developer, because obviously when you pull your plate out, you have a latent image on there, right, before you develop it. So you need the developer to reduce it completely to the metallic state. So yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, just worried about the death aspect of cyanide. I've seen your varnish comparison. I'd love to see the fixed comparison if you have the time. I do have a fixed comparison, actually. There's a video I did in Europe out there. I'll try to find it and link it. If not, just search it. There's quite a difference to my mind. But, and again, showing this stuff online versus being physically in the place, it's not really apples to apples, but we do our best. Yes, I agree, Paul. Stay clean. Cleanliness, you read in the book, cleanliness will get you a long, long, long way in this process. And part of that cleanliness is not cross-contaminating chemicals. I see that a lot. People use the same beaker for this, that, and the other, and then they have muddy, terrible images. And it's just, again, this lack of chemistry knowledge and what interacts with what and what doesn't, and all that stuff. What is the advantage of cadmium bromide over the other bromide salts used in other formula? Yeah, very good question, Mario. I use cadmium bromide for two reasons. The first reason is that it is a heavy metal and it gives the collodion some stability. This is, what is this? This is 4 months old, and it's been sitting on my desk here. You can see the color of it. It's perfect color. So it gives my ammonium iodide, NH4I, the good kind of, I prefer that iodide, some stability. That's the first thing. So cadmium builds some stability. The second, I like to use natural light as much as possible. And I see with cadmium, it gives better middle tones in the blues and greens, vegetation especially. You can read some of this in the old literature. And the cadmium is a very, it's dangerous, right? We all know that. We talked about that last week. But for me, image-wise, especially for negatives, it's just, and shelf life, it's just a wonderful bromide to use. You don't need to use it, obviously. There's others. So those are the two reasons I use it. Does exposing the negative to daylight after development before fixing? Yes, Paul, it does. He's asking, I make a negative over here in my window. I've got a little north light window here. I do some still lives, some portraits sometimes with. I pour my plate, I sensitize it, I expose it, I go in, I develop it, and before I fix it, I walk back out to that same high UV window, and I put the plate up in the window, and I let the UV strike that. What do you think that's doing? That's reducing more silver, more of the silver, and actually the reduction is completed. Actually, what it's doing, it's adding density by creating more, larger or more silver, if you will, however you want to put it, and adding just a tiny bit of more density to it. You do the same thing after you rehalogenate a plate with iodine. If you're going to redevelop it, I recommend you put it out in UV for a little bit. You can actually see it's mostly the iodine doing it, right? Iodine on silver, you get silver iodide again, a thin layer, very, very weak, but you get it. Now you're actually reducing that. It's more accurate to say it happens with redevelopment than after the first development. But you do. You can gain just a little bit of density. You can read that in the 19th century literature as well, too. So there is some truth to that. It doesn't really reduce it, though. That's the wrong word, because you've already reduced it with the iron, because it's post-development. Any do's and don'ts? Yes, the field work. Let's talk about this. And then Pat says this may be beyond the scope. Can you talk briefly why behind metathesis? Understand what's happening in your book, but can you say why it happens? That's a good question, Pat. That would be one of those things that would have to kind of deep dive on a chemical series. In other words, Pat's asking about double replacement or metathesis, about these ions exchanging when the AgNO3, the silver bath, and the salts on your plate say, hey, exchange an ion with me. Why is that happening? That's more of a physics question, but we can deep dive. It's a little beyond the scope. We've got a few people in here. I think I'd bore them to death, but I will definitely address that. If we want to do a deep dive on the chemistry and the physics and all that, I'll be happy to do that. But I wouldn't be able to get it in quickly enough to where people would start click out of here. So. But good question, Pat. That would be part of that series. Field work. Sean asked me about field work. It's on my topic here. Let's talk about field work for just a minute here. What's my methodology when I go out to the field? Most of you know, if you have my book and videos, in the 13th chapter, you'll see me down here in southern Colorado working on the Sand Creek Massacre site. You see that I have a dark box, and you see I go under my dark box, I develop my plates, I come out, I pour my plates outside, I go in to develop, I go in to develop, I come out, I fix my plates, blah, blah. You see I have a little stand. So my methodology is this. My dark box sits on the trunk or the lid of my bed here. I put my dark box up. Inside my dark box, I have my silver bath, and I have my trays for catching the developer and for flowing the water to arrest the development after I've completed development. Outside my dark box, I have a small table, just a fold-up table, a little one, 2 feet by 3 feet. And on that table, I have potassium cyanide tray and a wash tray. Below that, I have a rack, a small rack, usually 10 or 12 plate rack. I don't normally do over a dozen plates in the field. I'm coming back by that time. So this is my methodology in the field. Do not go in your tent, go in your dark box to pour your plate. Do not do that. We've talked about that last week. We know about ether. We know about all that stuff. So I stand near my dark box. I flow my plate. I drain it. I let it skin over. I open my silver bath. I put my plate in. I wait my time, whatever my time is. I go under my cloth. I pull my plate out of the silver bath under my red light or my red window, wipe the back off, load it in my plate holder, close my plate holder up, come out. My scene is set up. Go over to my camera, put it on, expose it, come back, go under the hood again, red light, open the plate holder up, take my plate out, put my tray under, pour my developer on. My developer's already poured out, sitting there, ready to go. Pour my developer on, do my development. Whatever, positive, negative, whatever it is, I have my pitcher of water there, usually about 1 liter, 2 liters of water. I start pouring it over the plate with my development. I see that greasiness. I wait for it. I arrest the development. Now I set the plate down on the corner of my tray that I run my wash water off in, set it on there. I lift my hood up, hang it up top. Then I pull my plate. I don't try to go out with my plate in. I've ruined many plates doing that. I go out to my little table. I submerge my plate into the potassium cyanide, fix it, rinse it, put it in the rinse. I have a wash bucket there, or a wash tray there. I let it drain off the cyanide, let it drain off, put it in my wash pan, and let it sit. That comes from my second workflow methodology. Sometimes I'll have a second wash tray, a third, 3 or 4 trays out full of water. And I'll just take that plate out of the wash water and I'll throw it in another tray. And I'll let those stack up. Somebody wrote me, I think it was John, if I remember his name correctly. John wrote me and said, hey, this is my workflow methodology. I make plates, not in the field necessarily. Maybe he was in the field, I don't know. I make plates and then I let them sit in the trays while I'm making photographs for an hour or so. Wonderful. The more wash time you can get, and that is considered wash time, even though it's not running, that helps. It goes to our question about fix again, right? Let's talk about the surfaces that we're using here. We're using a glass surface or a metal surface. We're not talking about the material soaking in. And over that surface, we put a layer of basically plastic, nitrocellulose. And so we're not talking about a wash times like paper, where this stuff, these compounds, chemicals absorb in, and this byproduct, this sodium argento thiosulfate or this silver cyanide, it's not absorbing into that. You just need to wash. My saying in the field is that I do a 5-minute tray wash. And if you want to switch the water out at 2.5 minutes, even better. And this doesn't have to be distilled water. You can do a final distilled water rinse if you want. You don't want, if you have really hard water, really mineral filled water, and you don't want those spots on your plate if you let it dry. I try not to let my plates dry in the field. And the reason is I don't want to have to come back and re-wet the plates if I want to redevelop them. And most of the time I'm redeveloping the plates. So how do I keep my plates wet? In the video description, you'll see a link. I think it's Lund Photographic. You'll see the watertight container with the rack in it. You can get one of those. Fill it with water, put your plates in there. You stay wet the whole time. Leave them in there for 3 days, whatever you want to do. The other method is to, after you fix them, or after you develop them, and even if you don't want to fix them, or if you do, you can fix them out in the field, and then use a 50-50 glycerin and water on it, on the plate. It'll keep the plate wet. You can wash the glycerin off when you get home, and then redevelop. Or you can put it on before after you develop and you want to fix it home. Whatever you want to do. There are many ways to keep the plate wet. And if you don't want to keep the plate wet, I highly recommend that you're somewhere where you can start to dry down the plate over a heat source, because rack drying, I talk about this in the book, sometimes if you have a little defect on the corners, will peel your plate. It starts to dry from the outside in. So the first thing that dry are the edges, and coating starts to shrink a little bit. Sometimes you'll get this lifting and peeling. So you want a heat source to dry those down in the field if you're going to bring them back dry. Those are some of the field exercises. And on top of that, a non kind of workflow methodology, more exposure-wise. Remember, when you're in the field and you're using natural sunlight, and you're used to working in a studio with strobes or continuous light or something, remember that's going to be much, much more powerful. You're going to cut your exposure times most likely in half or even more, depending on where you're at. I can go from the studio here that I have outside here at 3,000 meters or 6,000 feet, whatever, and above sea level, and my exposures go from 5 seconds to, a half a second or a second, depending on what I'm doing. I'm just using that as an example. Keep that in mind, because the first thing people find out when they go outside is, oh my God, if they've been working with artificial light, my exposures are cut so dramatically that I'm not even close. And they start experiencing what they think are chemical problems or silver bath or developer problems, and they're not. They're exposure problems. I hope that helps. Bernd just said, hey, Bernd, hello. No worries. You're never late. This is on forever, so you can watch it anytime. I just tried my brand new QC and had veiling. Absolutely. Just missed your explanation. Yes. Here's a very common problem. You have a bath, a silver bath that you've been using. And if you look on, Bernd, I know you have my book, so this is specifically to Bernd, and anyone else that has my book. If you look on page 53 of my book, you'll see that illustration. That's what I'm going to refer to here. Page 53 in my book, that illustration. You've been using a bath, and you've gone through a jar of collodion, a bottle of collodion with that bath. Everything's fine. Everything's running along just great. Perfect, wonderful, great. No veiling, no fogging, no problems at all. And then all of a sudden you make a new collodion, a new batch of collodion, just like Bernd just said. Well, guess what? That collodion is hot. That's hot. That's got, those iodides are fresh, right? So now you put it in this old bath, and guess what you're going to do? Your developer, you pour that on, you're going to reduce everything down, including that free silver on top of the plate. It'll wipe off with a cotton ball, but it's hot. So what you have to do is you have to either switch up your bath to a new bath. If you have another bath, switch over. You want to keep these in alignment. So you look on page 53 and you'll see that more iodized collodion uses a different bath than a new collodion uses a different bath in pH and silver content. That's basically what's happening. So you can do one of two things. Let that collodion set until you get a nice color to it, and it'll work just fine with your bath that you've been using, or switch out a bath. And you can also add a little more restrainer to your developer too, if you'd like. You said that. It's a problem if the developer could wipe it off. Yeah, you can. You can do that. Or use another bath that isn't so accustomed to a particular amount of iodides. And that's what it is, right? That's what it is. It's a subtle amount of extra density, so I was wondering if it was worth doing it. I don't think it's worth doing it, Paul. I don't think going back to after you develop, go out and take your developed plate out in the sun. I mean, if you're outdoors and you have a minute or two, why not? Set it over there, let the sun hit it for a minute. You're going to get your density with the control through redevelopment. That's what I encourage. On positives, thanks, Quinn. Yeah, the QC had much more density to light than old workhorse and new guy premixed. Yes, it does, and that's because of the NH4I or the ammonium iodide. You can read in the old literature. I just sent out, and I'll post it. I'll try to remember. You can read about how they talked about how ammonium iodide, that's why it's used for negatives, right? How ammonium iodide is the most aggressive, they talk about. And that's what I like. I control it, but that's what I like. I don't like the weaker ones. Jean, hello. Oh, wealth of information. This is great. Thank you, Phil. I'm glad you joined us today. That's great to have new folks in and to get a wide variety of questions. Let me jump over here to my list. Ignore me for just a second while I pull my sheet up. I haven't even looked at it here yet. I'm just going to rattle off a couple of things. I talked to you about the glass, field work. Oh yeah, washing after fixing. I talked about the sodium argento thiosulfate. That's easy for me to say. Not absorbing, right? How long the wash is. Life of chemistry. We talked a little bit about that. Remember, you can have the collodion you make, the iodides you have in here will affect how far your bath will in fact be functional before you have to do some kind of maintenance on it. One of the questions was, do I empty my bath every time after a session, a photo session? The answer is yes. I take it out of the tank, I filter it through just cotton ball and a coffee filter, and I put it back in the tank. If it hasn't, if I've only had a few sessions with it, that's all I do with it. But yes, absolutely I do that for two reasons. Number one, water evaporates. So it's a good thing if you're trying to get rid of solvents and you have a solvents problem like I talked about, but it's not a good thing when your concentration gets too high. Your water evaporates and your silver content goes up. Now your iodide silver content is off. Now you're going to have problems with your plates. Number two, if you have other compounds, kitchen compounds, anything with ammonia in it, if people are smoking cigarettes, if you're building wood fireplace and stove, whatever you're doing, that silver bath is like a sponge. It will absorb anything in the air, and you will pay a price for that, especially ammonia. You will pay a huge price for that. You will not be able to make photographs with that bath again until you maintain it. So two reasons: evaporation and cleanliness, and also I get any chunks of the collodion that's come off a plate, or it's just good practice, right? It's just good methodology to do that. So I do that. The other question earlier was about gold tones. This is a great question. Please don't forget. Sanford, you got me, and I remembered though. You got me. Thanks for always remind me, guys, because my mind. I've had 3 coffees this morning already, so my mind's going. Gold tones, very important. There's a couple of different kinds of gold tones. Now I'm only going to recommend the borax gold tone. And what is the borax gold tone? The borax gold tone is a small amount of borax with gold chloride mixed together in distilled water. That's what the gold tone is. And it's great for printing out processes. It's wonderful. The other gold tone is like the tetanol, the thiocyanate, the tetanol, a little more aggressive. You get a little more rain. That's over. That's gone. So I recommend you can buy gold chloride from Artcraft. You can go to Freestyle. You can go to Photo Formulary. Anywhere they sell gold pop toning kits, just make sure it's gold chloride, usually 1 gram, and a few grams of borax. And that's your gold toning kit. Really easy to make. Bring your temperature up to around 100 degrees, around 80 Celsius or so, and mix your borax and then your gold chloride, and then top it off to a liter. Great toner, works great. That's all you need. You can go through the iterations. It takes a little longer to go through the color iterations, from a kind of a chocolate brown all the way to kind of a cooler color. I don't want to put a color on it because everybody sees it a little different. So get your 1 gram of gold chloride and your borax, and you're off to the races, Sanford. You'll love it. Linda, hello. I'm new to the world of wet plate. Is there anything you wish you knew then you didn't know now? Advice for a beginner. That's a great question, Linda. That's a really good question. One thing that I wished I would have known then, when I started almost 20 years ago, there wasn't any information out there. There was a Civil War reenactment board that's long since gone. And most of those guys on the board were kind of like, all the artists or all the hobbyists now. They just kind of went through the motions. They didn't really understand it. I'm kind of a geeky guy. I kind of like the alchemy and the art mixed together kind of thing. I like to understand how things work. So one thing I wished, not that I would have known, but I wished I would have had resources for understanding the process. But to your question, one thing I wished I would have known is that the process isn't as complicated as people make it out to be. And it's not as difficult to do as people make it out to be. The people, and I understand why they do that. I understand it. It's somewhat difficult. It's somewhat dangerous. And there are these elements that can be mysterious, and we fear what we don't know. That's our nature. We fear what we don't know. So fear breeds anxiety and breeds suspicion. And so I wished I would have known that just take a deep breath. These gals and guys and gals in the 19th century did this every day, all day long, for many, many decades. and it's doable. You can get it down, you can get good at it, and you can be safe with it without compromising your health or other people's health or safety. And so that's what I wished I would have known, is that while it seems daunting to start in the beginning, over time you'll look back on this stuff and say, oh, that was so silly. Look at what I did here. That's so silly, right? And so, and I'm not saying ignore the safety stuff or ignore anything. I just wished I would have known that it's not as daunting as it seems. And then secondly, Linda, you have resources today that weren't available back then, right? And so there's a lot of resources today that you can draw from. I'm not saying take everything as gospel, not even what I say, right? Do your research, check me out, check Joe Schmo and Sally Schmo out, what they say. Do your own research and do your due diligence and find out who's right, who's safe, and who's giving you the best advice for you making these photographs. That's what I'd recommend most than anything. Do you routinely clean your silver tank? Use a dowel and a paper towel every session? Tim, that's a great question. Tim is asking, after I dump my silver and I do a little coffee filter and I use the little makeup pads with a coffee filter in it. I don't have it in front of me. After I do that, drain and cap my bottle, put my bottle of silver nitrate back. Now my dipping tanker, my silver tank, I take my dipper, I put a clean paper towel on that, and run the dipper down in the silver tank. I do it on both sides. Then I turn it upside down and put the dipper next to it, wipe the dipper off so everything's nice and clean. I do that. That's a very good point. Thank you for mentioning that. See, this stuff is so routine to me. I need people to query me and ask what I do, because I forget about that. You're absolutely right. That's very good. Phil, can we talk about exposure test strips with flash? I have an f4 lens and I want to create a 5-strip test with the middle strip test being my target. Do you still apply the rule of two for the amount of flash we use? That's a very good question, Phil. Here's the problem with giving you a definitive answer on that. I don't know how old your collodion is. I don't know the distance to the subject with your f4 lens. I recommend that, and the size of plate, your format, you'll have a little more room on certain plates to do test strips. I recommend you run one test at 1 second intervals, as many as you can get on any given size plate, with one pop. Just do one pop at f4. I don't know the wattage of your strobe either, so if it's 2400 or 48, if it's 4800, I do one pop f4 and do one strip pulse, one pop each, and see where you land. Then you can gauge where you want to land where you think your good exposure would be. That's a good question though. So I wait or build up a new silver. Yes, Bernd. Remember, I always recommend to have 2 silver baths. One you're working with, and then one you can substitute in for either a new collodion, a problem with your old bath that you need a couple of days to maintain or take care of, so you can keep working. But your new collodion with the ammonium iodide will turn fast. You know this, right? And if you want to help it out, put it in the window sill with a little bit of light, or put it in a warm pan of water and burp it. Don't let that ether build up. Make sure you unscrew it or uncork it so you can evaporate that off. And that heat or light will exacerbate the breakdown of that iodide. For example, 2 stops, 1 stop, target stop, 1 stop, 2 stops. Yeah, that's really hard to answer, Phil. You're talking traditional photography, and that's great. With collodion, you're going to have to wing and a prayer it, again, because of all those variables of ISO, distance to subject, and we don't have a solid science number for that. So again, I recommend if you're, let's say you're using a 4800 watt second strobe system, do one pop strips and see where you get. Try that. I think with an f4 you're going to get in there. You're very welcome, Linda. I'm happy to answer anything that I hope it. I try to answer as best I can. No, one flash. Do just one pop per strip. One pop per strip, because at the end you're going to have 4 pops at this end and 1 pop at this end, right? Does that make sense? I think it does. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm off. I think for me, the hard part of wet plate is learning the technique, understanding something, being able to do it, not the same as practice. Pat, you hit the nail on the head. What you're talking about is methodology, technique and methodology. You have two components in wet plate. You have the chemical, technical, chemical, light, exposure, all that. Then you have the technique. And once you put these two things together, and if they're not both hooking up well, you're going to have problems somewhere. That's just what it is. So I always give the example, it's kind of like, say you didn't know how to tie your shoelaces on your shoes, and you're trying to explain, or the person you're talking to doesn't know how to tie their shoelaces, and you're trying to explain how to tie your shoelaces over the phone. That's a lot how this process is. That's why it's so valuable. If you can do a workshop with somebody that knows what they're doing, it's so valuable to stand next to the person or have them standing next to you, showing techniques, showing workflow, showing safety, showing all of this stuff. And you're absolutely right. That's a very good point. Good, Phil. Good. Yes, good. I'm glad that's what you thought, because you're right on point with that. And you try that, you let us know how that works. A lot of people are using strobes now. I think the Russian folks started that, modern lenses and strobes. Years ago, I first saw the Russians, lack of sun, lack of, way north of 40, that's for sure. So that is, anything else? I mean, I know we've gone a little over an hour, but if you guys want to address anything else, I am game to do that. You just let me know. Wonderful, wonderful. Hit me up with any more questions here. Let me see if I have anything else on my docket here. Pat, you're a good man. I appreciate your support. Thank you for that. I tried, the goal with my videos here, yes, I want to sell books. Yes, I do. I do have a motive that way. This is the only way I can kind of encourage. But beyond the book, I want to give a little more. Pat kind of addressed this. This is the closest thing I can give to you guys to without you being in a workshop with me. At least I can sit down and ask, get some of these questions out of your head that some people I've had write me. I lay awake at night worrying about this or that or the other, and I want to alleviate some of those questions, both for safety, making good images. I want to get you guys, I'm a very big advocate. I'm an evangelist for people to do this process, do it safely, and do it well. And these videos, I hope, contribute to that end goal. And I hope, I sell a book here and there, and that's great. And I want to do that. Everybody needs to make a living, and you guys have been wonderful supporting me that way. Like I said, I'm around 40 books now, and I can't thank you enough. I'm very grateful. The gratitude pours onto you. Thank you very much. And I'm not being facetious about that. Thank you, Jan from Norway. I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate your kind words too. Like anybody, I'm a human being. I'm fallible. I want to hear that things are working, that they're making sense, that I'm not wasting your time or wasting my time. Tim says, sometimes I need to remind myself why we do wet plate collodion. Yes, that's excellent. Maybe on some future show we could talk philosophy. I would love to do that, Tim. You know this. I would love to examine why we use collodion and address the questions, the conceptual questions around it, and help people give words to inform of why they're doing it. A lot of times, photographers and artists say, God, I don't know. You ask them, why are you doing this? Or why are you doing, you do the Socratic method, right? Socrates, our old favorite philosopher, you push them a little bit and you query them and you say, why are you using this? And they stop for a second, they kind of look around and they think, I've never thought about that. And then they start thinking about it. And then all of a sudden they come up on a block. They don't have words to talk about why they're using it. And a lot of times when we have a session, and we've had them in the past, not very often, but when we have a session on the conceptual, people get a lot out of that. They say, wow, I've never thought about that. Or boy, you've given me some great ideas. Or other people in the show, not just me. You guys are chatting in the chat room. Great brilliant minds there, great thinkers. You guys are all valuable to this. So I would love to have that conversation, Tim. I would love to do that. You mentioned thank you, Pat. You mentioned a couple of weeks ago doing a pot print on Yupo. I would think you would find it, curl was no issue. I did a pot print on Yupo, and I actually gave that away. It was awesome. It works great. Yupo paper works great. The only thing that I would say about Yupo paper is you're going to have a piece of plastic in your hand, and you're going to know it's plastic. There's no curling issues. There's no, it's great. It works great. There's no bleed through issues. There's nothing. So I'm glad you brought that up, Pat. That's a very good thing to mention again. I did make a Yupo print. I'm used to constant light source coming from a cinematography background using light meters, so all the chemicals apart from the background are quite daunting. Yes, and we'll do more Q&A, Phil. This is a great thing to open the forum up and say, bring whatever's on your mind. Get it off. Let's get it out. If I don't know it, we'll find out. If I'm unsure, we'll get to the bottom of it. But you're absolutely right. This process is it's like trying to hit a moving target. Things change all the time. Your collodion's changing in ISO. Your natural light is changing if you're outdoors. You got to pour plates. Your bath times and temperatures are changing. Your technique might be a little off. You're really trying to hit that moving target, and it takes time and it takes practice. Just like I think Pat said earlier, or Tim, or both of you, it takes practice, and practice makes perfect. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but practice does help. And after almost 20 years of doing that, I feel very comfortable in this process, both on use, safety, and producing what I want to produce for the end image or print or whatever I'm doing. Phil says, please come to the UK for some courses. I've done quite a few courses in the UK years ago. I wish I could. I'd love to do that. Any tips for going outdoors for landscape, outdoor shooting, things, chance leaving the studio chemical or process-wise? Well, Farrad, I addressed that a little bit earlier. And the big things, have your workflow set up before you go out in the field. He's asking if you go out in the field, any tips or tricks. And I mentioned this earlier. I'll just reiterate real quickly. Have your workflow down. Do a dry run on your workflow. Okay, I'm going to go out to my car and I'm going to open the trunk up, and there's my dark box. So I get in and I do this. Maybe even do a little test run right there at your house or apartment or wherever you might have your vehicle or your bicycle or your motorcycle, whatever you're using. Run through your workflow. That's what I did in the beginning. I set my dark box up on my tailgate. My tailgate on my truck comes down. I set my dark box up. I have my little table with my trays. I have my rack. Check your inventory before you leave the house, right? I've gone out and I don't have my plates, or I don't have fix, or, check your inventory. Check your cooler. Have your little list. Check it off and make sure, especially, I go hours away, so I can't go out to the Great Plains in Colorado and pick up some ether, right? I don't have that ability, or plates or glass plates or whatever. So, and I prepare all my plates before I leave the house. I prepare all my glass plates or, tin types. I make sure, whatever it is, my holders, I have all my insert, everything. Check your whole list, because it's easy. Oh, I misplaced that. In the studio, you can just run over there and get it. Out there, if you don't have it, you're done. So you don't make plates and you've just driven an hour or two, whatever. Secondly, that workflow methodology, make sure everything works. Make sure you don't have light leaks in your plate holder. So this is one I didn't mention earlier. Your camera, your plate holder, and your dark box or dark room or tent or whatever you're using is going to be vulnerable to the outdoor light. If you have any leak at all, it's going to show when you go outside. It's just the tiniest pinhole in your bellow, just a tiny leak in your holder. Your box or your tent isn't quite there. Your plate will strike or fog, I guarantee it. So make sure your light leaks are good. Make sure you sealed everything up. Work through your workflow methodology. Make sure you have enough water. Make sure you bring a garbage sack for your refuse or your trash or your rubbish, whatever you want to call it. Make sure you can dispose of the byproducts, the wastewater and things like that safely. And make sure you're safe yourself, that you have gloves, that you have whatever you feel necessary, definitely gloves, needed to work in the field. Make sure you do that there. don't make a mess, don't destroy the environment, and make as good as images as you can. And remember, your exposures are going to be much, much faster. They're going to be a lot shorter exposure outdoors. So I don't know how many times emails I've received that people say, Quinn, what went wrong? And they send me a snap of an image. And immediately I can see it's just completely overexposed, just not overdeveloped, but overexposed. And they preface in there, I've been making, my chemistry's great. I work in my continuous light or my strobes. It looks great. I go out to the field and I get this. And I tell them now they're working with real UV light, full strength A and B light, 270 to 350 nanometers. And you're going to reduce your exposures. You need to close your lens down, do shorter exposures, something to mitigate that overexposure of the plates. So starting out, remembering that that light is going to be much more intense. You don't want light leaks and you don't want overexposure. So just keep those things in mind. Yeah, my dark box. Pat, you can see my dark box in chapter 13 video. Go to the videos and the book. You can see me working at Sand Creek with it. In fact, there's I can show it to you guys too. I'll take you out and show it to you sometime. No problem. I did not make it myself. I got it years and years ago. Where did I get that from? I can't even remember now. But I recommend people use appliance boxes now if they don't want to buy a wooden one or make a wooden one. It's just that I'm so used to it. I've been using it for 15 years or something, you know, so I'm just used to it. And I can do all the way up to about 8x10 plates. My jam is whole plate and half plate. And I did this last project on square. Next week when we come in, I have a workshop on Friday. Next time we come in, you're going to see a portrait and a print from this new glass. I'm going to talk about that a little bit next week. I'm going to do I've already lined it up with a student, and we're going to do that. We're going to do some other things with her too, but for her, not just for me. That's what I'm saying. Yes, I'll definitely show you my dark box sometime. Thank you, Farad. Thank you for the joining me. And, you know, like I always say this, you guys have a ton of other things you could be doing, and here you are spending your time with me. I guess I have some other things I could be doing too, but a mutual contract to say to come in. You guys give me great questions. I hope I reciprocate that. I hope I give you back some answers that are useful. I hope you get what you need out of this. And if you have anything else, calm. What do you mean, Pat? Calm. If you have anything else, we can address that. If not, throw me some topics for next week. Like I said, I'm going to I'll show you a print from this new 1mm glass. Remember that? Can I show that down there? I don't know if that really shows. Maybe it does. This new 1mm glass versus the old stuff. This, I don't know what this is. Over 2mm, and that's actually quite an old negative too. So I'll show you that, and I'll talk a little bit about that and see if it's worth looking into. And like I said, eventually I'm going to do the test on the soda, the soda lime glass. And this S.I. Howard Glass Company, I'll put in the link, and you can check that out too if you want to look at some glass. If you're doing negatives, remember we're talking not positives, but negatives. We're talking about transmitted light to paper. And positives, we're talking about reflected light to look at the image, right? So grain structure and silver, clarity, all that stuff. But UV going through the glass is really important, the thickness and all that. So I'm gonna do a little bit of test on that and see where we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. I'm going to continue on my day. Have a great Saturday and a great rest of the weekend. And I hope to catch you next Saturday. Send me your questions if you want to do another open Q&A. If you want to keep doing these, I am completely on board with that. We can seed in a couple little things here and there. Look at the dark box, show a print, talk about a negative, whatever we want to do, we can do that. Just let me know. Thank you for your time. Have a great weekend. Ciao.